Hey guys, tonight we're going to time travel backwards. Way, way backwards. Until wristwatches are gone. Clocks don't exist, and your only schedule is drawn in sunlight and silence. You're in the middle of a wide, golden brown landscape. The sand is warm under your bare feet, the kind that sinks just a little when you shift your weight. In the distance, dry wind kicks up dust in lazy curls around a stone wall. The sun overhead is both brutal and divine. You squint and realize the people around you are also looking at the sun, not in panic, not for a tan, but as if it's speaking. Welcome to ancient Babylon, where the shadows tell time better than your overpriced smartwatch. And yes, this is the kind of place where your alarm clock is a tall rock and a superstitious priest. You probably won't survive this society without developing some respect for shade. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, I'd love to know, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it for you? Drop it in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The day begins slowly in Babylon. There's no rooster, no beeping phone. Just light changing color as it rises behind the mud brick skyline. You walk through the morning haze, past squat houses and palms, the scent of clay ovens still clinging to the cool breeze. Already, a man is crouched near a stick in the ground, his version of checking the time. That stick, by the way, has a name, a gnomon, and though it looks suspiciously like something a child forgot in the dirt, it's the beating heart of Babylonian timekeeping. When the sun is low, the gnomon casts a long shadow. As it rises, the shadow shortens. Then, predictably, it stretches again in the opposite direction. To modern eyes, it might seem crude, but to the Babylonians, this was cosmic order unfolding before your eyes. You sit on a warm stone ledge and try to see what they see. Movement without motion. Change without noise. Imagine living in a world so quiet, so undistracted, that the subtle shifting of light across a courtyard wall could trigger temple rituals or citywide workdays. I didn't think of time as rigid lines or blinking numbers. Time was soft, a rolling rhythm dictated by nature and gods. There were no seconds, no alarms, no deadlines. Instead, there were phases. Morning light, prayer light, work light, dusk. And the gnomon? It was your guide through these states. Nearby, a boy gets scolded for casting his own shadow across the stick. "You're messing up the reading," someone snaps. You smirk. Even back then, kids were interrupting ancient tech with their little feet. One historical fact to keep in mind: Babylonian priests were among the earliest to formalize astronomical observations. They weren't just stargazers, they were bureaucrats of the heavens. If the sun's shadow said it was time for market, then the stalls opened. If the moon was missing, people muttered. Time wasn't abstract, it was personal. But of course, this came with its quirks. For instance, Babylonian time wasn't evenly divided like ours. Hours were longer in summer and shorter in winter, which meant technically, if you wanted more leisure, you should have been born in June. And if you're wondering, yes, some fringe researchers claim that early Babylonian timekeepers based certain shadow measurements on the movements of birds. The theory, bird migration patterns synchronized with solar shifts, gave clues about upcoming seasonal change. It's debated, of course. Most mainstream historians just nod politely and walk away from that theory. Still, there's something undeniably mesmerizing about the simplicity. You squint at the sun. It blinks back, unmoved. Time doesn't tick, it leans. The shadow from the temple wall has moved just slightly, sliding its line along the baked earth like a whisper. You pass through a street where people mark walls with scratches, one for each watt of the day. That's the Babylonian version of an hourly chime. No chimes, no gears, just the slow stretch of shadow across your doorway. It's a strange kind of peace. No one's late, no one's early. They just are. And there's a lesson there maybe. A softness. You don't have to check your phone every 5 minutes to know where you're supposed to be. Maybe you're exactly where the shadow says you are. Still, historians argue whether this earliest form of sundial, just a stick in the ground, was truly invented by the Babylonians or simply formalized by them after centuries of shared Mesopotamian practice. In a world where knowledge passed slowly, sometimes through gossip more than scholars, it's hard to draw clear lines. You stretch your legs. The sand has warmed under you and the sun is higher now. The gnomons' shadow has moved again, small but decisive. Someone nearby nods and picks up their basket of dates. Their cue has arrived, not from a ringtone but from a line of shade. It's oddly satisfying to move by shadow. It makes you feel ancient, yes, but also connected, like you too are part of something bigger than your calendar app. You look down and see your own shadow stretch across the path, thin, angled, ticking slowly through the day. Somewhere, centuries in the future, someone will still be late for work. But here, you're right on time. The sun is climbing, and you follow its path, not with your eyes, but with your footsteps. As the morning ripens, you head toward an open field just beyond the outer walls of Babylon. Here, time stretches not by seconds or minutes, but by the length of a tree's shadow. You pause at a sun-baked clearing, where several wooden poles have been driven into the earth like forgotten tent stakes. You realize, with a quiet chuckle, that this is ancient scheduling. Babylonians used the sky as their clock, and shadows as the ticking hands. The entire sky, in fact, is a working calendar. Clouds might come and go, but the sun and stars are always on time. For Babylonian astronomers, and honestly, they were more like sky accountants, nothing mattered more than keeping precise track of these celestial rhythms. They didn't just see time, they read it in the heavens. You watch as a man kneels beside a sunken pit lined with small pebbles. He gently moves a few to the side and begins scratching lines in the dirt, a kind of star chart for dummies. There's no telescope, no calculator, just fingers, stone, and a lifetime of habit. He's tracking the equinoxes. That means he's measuring when day and night are roughly equal in length, an astronomical turning point. For Babylonians, these weren't just natural phenomena. They were cosmic announcements, whispered from gods to humans via sunbeam. You sit quietly, trying to imagine what it would be like to rely solely on the sun's angle to decide when to eat, when to pray, or when to start harvesting wheat. It sounds simple, almost romantic, but also a total nightmare during cloudy weather, which is why Babylonian priests took these measurements so seriously. If you didn't know where the sun was supposed to be, how would you know whether the gods were angry or just playing hide and seek? One mainstream historical fact worth knowing here: Babylonian astronomers kept detailed records of celestial movements as early as 1800 BCE. These records span generations. One guy starts noting where Venus appears on the horizon, and then 300 years later, his great-great-grandstudent is still tracking it. It's the world's first long-term project, kind of like a group essay on the universe, where nobody gets to quit. But let's get weird for a second. A fringe theory exists that Babylonian timekeepers used polished metal discs to amplify sunlight and sharpen shadow readings, like ancient magnifying glasses. It's mostly speculation, but you admit the idea of a bronze solar beam booster feels weirdly sci-fi for a civilization where most people still walked barefoot. Back in the clearing, you notice one of the poles is carved, not decorated, but measured. Grooves run up its side like a ruler. At each groove, the shadow would hit a different point depending on the time of day, time of year, and your willingness to squint just right. It's not a sundial as we think of it. Those come later, but it's a proto-sundial, and it works, barely. But still, what's striking is how time and the cosmos were one. The Babylonian year wasn't just seasonal, it was stellar. Months were lunar, sure, but also tied to the heliacal rising of key stars like Sirius or Aldebaran. These weren't just twinkles in the sky, they were markers. You see that? That means we're 3 weeks from planting barley, someone might say, squinting upward. Or, if that star glows red again tomorrow, we cancel the ceremony. Too risky. You hear whispers about omens, eclipses, portents. Shadows weren't just tools, they were warnings. If the sun's shadow did something strange, it could mean a king would die, or a war would begin. Babylonian astrologer priests, called Beru, weren't just telling time. They were predicting fate. You rest in the shade of a low wall, watching dust swirl in the sunlight. The air smells like dry earth and old stone. A boy nearby mimics the shadow of his father, crouching in the same pose, giggling. It's a reminder that even then, learning the sky was often a family affair. You didn't go to clock school, you just watched. You copied, and slowly, time revealed itself. Still, historians debate whether early Babylonians fully understood the solar year's length, or simply stumbled upon its pattern through generations of tracking and trial. After all, nobody back then was counting exactly 365.2422 days per year. But if your barley came in when expected, who really cared? By now, the sun is directly overhead. The shadows vanish almost entirely, curling up tight beneath people's feet like shy pets. Noon, not that they called it that, is a sacred pause. Workers stop, markets hush, even birds retreat into whatever shade they can find. You follow their lead and lean back against warm stone. The silence is thick but kind. There's something strangely poetic about this system. You live not by numbers, but by sensation. The length of your day is something you can feel on your skin. You don't wear a watch, you watch. Literally. The man with the scratched sun chart looks up, squints at the light, and erases a line with his palm. Time here is not fixed. It's smudged, flexible. There's no on the dot. There's only about now, and somehow it works. Just before you drift into a nap, you catch one final detail. At the edge of the clearing, an older woman is aligning a bowl of water so it catches the sunlight at just the right angle. The surface glimmers, no shadows, just a bright circle. She watches, waits, then without a word gets up and walks away. Maybe that was her clock. Maybe she just liked shiny things. But either way, the message is clear. In ancient Babylon, time doesn't chase you. It waits, right there in the light, right there in the shadow. You wake slowly, blinking up at the sky. The sun has drifted westward, and the shadows once tight beneath the feet of morning priests are long again, stretching eastward like lazy limbs. It's as if the earth itself is sighing toward the afternoon. You rise, brushing sand from your arms, and wander toward a different part of the city where a collection of smooth stones arranged in a circular pattern catch your eye. At first glance, it looks like a child's game, or perhaps the remnants of a half-finished marketplace stall. But then you spot it, a slender rod, dead center, casting a lean shadow that kisses the edge of one of the outer stones. You found it, a sundial, or at least the earliest known cousin of one. This is Nomen culture, part 2. The stick has evolved. The Babylonians took that humble spike in the dirt and started getting clever. By measuring where its shadow landed at different hours and logging that data over seasons, they turned it into a proper instrument. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. You watch as an old man mutters to himself and adjusts a stone slightly, aligning it with the now stretched shadow. He's not fixing it, he's tuning it. Like a musician would a lyre. His instrument just happens to be sunlight. Historically, we know Babylonian sundials began as vertical gnomons in open courtyards, where the sun could cast clean, uninterrupted shadows. Over time, they added measuring surfaces, stone, clay, even etched metal plates that could record the angles. Some were circular, others square, but all shared a single purpose, dividing the divine into digestible chunks. But here's the kicker. Babylonian hours weren't fixed like yours. They were always 12 hours of daylight, which meant an hour in winter was much shorter than an hour in summer. If you worked under the hot sun all day in July, you were suffering through a long shift. But come December, clocking in was basically a coffee break. And yes, historians still debate whether this division was truly mathematical or ritualistic. Did they care more about dividing time evenly, or simply about syncing their days with temple events and celestial patterns? Maybe a little of both. The line between math and myth was blurrier back then than the midday horizon. A young apprentice approaches the sundial, kneeling beside the old man. He unrolls a slab of clay, already etched with tiny cuneiform notations. You peek over his shoulder. It's a record of shadow lengths at various times of day, tracked across the lunar month. In your time, this would go in a spreadsheet. Here, it gets baked and stored in the temple archives. Millennia from now, some archaeologist will dig it up, squint, and try to figure out whether the line marked 5 fingers meant 5 degrees or 5 days. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you watch them work. Some Babylonian sundials used angled surfaces instead of flat ones, allowing for more refined seasonal calibration. Picture a slanted roof with shadow lines creeping across it. Suddenly, the stick-and-dirt approach seems like version 1.0. You lean against a wall and squint at the dial yourself. It's not perfect. The lines are uneven, and the shadow dances a little in the wind. But still, you can't help but admire the sheer ambition of it. With no glass, no gears, no electricity, these people turned the sun itself into a cooperative coworker. As the sun drops lower, the whole city begins to respond. The markets quiet, the alleyways lengthen, the laughter of children fades into the corners of shaded courtyards. You follow the gnomen's lead and move with the light. It's not lost on you that all of this shadow science required consistency from the environment. A cloudy day threw off your schedule. A crooked gnomon meant missed sacrifices or late afternoon prayers. But somehow, in this inconsistent world, they built a system that endured for centuries, and all they needed was patience, repetition, and an obsessive love for the sun. A dog pads past you, following its own stretch of shadow. Even the animals seemed synced with this slow, drifting dance of time. You think about modern timekeeping, atomic clocks, GPS satellites, world time zones. Then you glance back at the gnomon. It just sits there, calm, indifferent, waiting for light to move, unbothered by your hustle. And it still works. It might not be perfect, but neither are you. Maybe that's why you get along. There's also something deeply human about it. You don't need to understand trigonometry to know what direction the shadow's pointing. You don't need to decode ancient symbols to know it's getting late. It's intuitive, honest. It doesn't beep at you. It doesn't vibrate. It just leans gently across the earth and suggests maybe now's the time. You wander back toward the temple square, watching others take their own readings. Some are formal, others casual. One merchant has his wares lined up beside a stick, using the shadow to know when to pack up. A woman checks her shadow against the bricks of her home. 2 boys race to the end of their shadows like it's a game of tag. You realize this was timekeeping as a collective experience. Everyone saw the same shadow. Everyone shared the same clock. And perhaps that's what you miss most in your modern world. Everyone has a phone, but nobody's looking in the same direction. As the sky shifts to orange and the shadow grows fat and wobbly, you step back, hands behind your head. The sun is almost done with its journey. The gnomon, now tall and proud in the evening light, delivers its final reading for the day. Not with numbers or beeps, but with a stretch, a sigh, and silence. Tomorrow, it'll all happen again. A new angle, a new length, but the same rhythm. Steady, quiet, eternal. The sun kisses the edge of the ziggurat now, Babylon's towering stairway to the stars. You wander toward it slowly, the sky deepening into a burnished copper above you, while shadows bleed longer and longer across the baked stone. There's a quiet reverence in the air, like the city is holding its breath for something sacred. Which, of course, it is, because as night approaches, the temple priests emerge. And these priests, racked in their layered robes and glistening oils, don't just pray, they keep time. In Babylon, temples weren't just holy ground, they were the city's central clocks. And nothing marked the time better than a towering ziggurat casting its divine shadow across the city's sprawl. You find yourself craning your neck at the massive, terraced pyramid before you. The sun has dipped just far enough that the temple's eastern face now bathes in shadow. It's a slow, theatrical transition, as if the gods themselves are dimming the lights. And that's the point. You see, ziggurats weren't built randomly. They were aligned, carefully, intentionally. Their stairs, platforms, and walls often mirrored celestial directions, east to west, north to south. Their shadows became instruments of time, thrown in precise lines across courtyards, water channels, and sacred gardens. The very structure was a gnomon on a grand scale. Historians widely agree that some Babylonian temples were oriented to track solstices and equinoxes. But the specifics? Still a bit foggy. Were they used daily? Monthly? Only for rituals? Scholars debate how much these shadows were functional versus symbolic. Were the priests truly reading time, or were they just impressing the crowds? A few fringe researchers even argue that ziggurats worked like macro sundials, marking hours on specific feast days using their towering silhouettes. Imagine casting a 100-foot-long shadow just to tell when to serve goat stew. It might sound far-fetched, but you're standing there now and the evidence is persuasive. You trace the edge of the shadow with your toe. It slices across the stone courtyard like a divine ruler. A few figures begin to kneel as it touches the temple steps. That's their signal. Not a bell, not a voice, just the quiet descent of darkness from a holy rooftop. You follow them up the ziggurat. The stairs are steep, narrow, and worn. Your calves complain, but there's no shortcut. Time, after all, has always been about the long way up. At the top, you're greeted by the wind. Stronger here, cleaner. You're high above the scent of smoke and sweat. Below, the city glows in the fading light. Mud brick homes, rooftop gardens, quiet streets, and to the west, the Euphrates, glittering like melted copper. A priest stands with his arms outstretched, casting his own long shadow over a ceremonial bowl of water. You glance down. There's something there. Floating dots? No, reflections. The sun's light bends against the surface, marking lines on the bowl's inner rim. A trick of light? Or an ancient optical device? It's hard to say. But this isn't superstition. It's observation dressed as ritual. Another figure nearby adjusts a set of bricks, aligned in a row. From your new vantage point, you notice how the temple's shadow touches each one by one, as the sun slips away. It's too regular to be random. And suddenly, you realize this is a calendar in stone. The priest doesn't need a sundial when the entire building is his clock. It's not just practical, either. It's poetic. Because in Babylon, time is sacred. The gods are timekeepers. And when a shadow touches a particular mark on a temple wall, that's not just 3 p.m. It's a divine appointment. The air up here is thinner, and it slows your thoughts. You feel the day winding down like a hand cranking an invisible wheel. The sounds from the city fade. No carts, no voices, just the whisper of wind over stone. It's as if time itself is whispering, "We are closing for the day. Please collect your things." You sit beside a shallow groove in the stone, likely carved to channel rain, but also used, some say, to track the stars as they rose in the east. Another use of structure as a tool. Everything here is dual purpose, sacred and scientific, myth and math. Still, you can't help but smirk at a thought. What if all these priests were just really into shadows? Like, maybe some of this grandeur was just an elaborate excuse for a few old men to play with light. And you know what? You respect it. One quirky detail floats back to you. Some ziggurat designs included slotted windows or open-air chambers designed to capture sunbeams at specific angles, only on certain days. That means these guys were architecting light. Michelangelo who? You look to the horizon. The sun is melting behind a hill. The final sliver of light slips past the edge of the ziggurat. Down below, a chorus of horns rises, echoing softly through the air. Not a loud alarm, just a reminder. Time has changed. In the quiet that follows, you realize the temple's shadow will not return to this position until tomorrow, until the sun completes its arc. And in that predictable cycle, the city finds certainty. It's beautiful, really. Not the shadow itself, but what it represents. Stability, order. The ability to know something in a world full of unknowables. Death, taxes, and the shadow of the ziggurat touching that fourth brick from the left. As night settles in, you descend slowly. The stairs creak with age, but the air is cool now and kind. You feel calmer, like your pulse has synced with something older, something slower. The priests remain above, watching the sky. The rest of the city prepares for night, and time continues, marked not by clocks or buzzers, but by silence, architecture, and the graceful arc of a shadow. You wander through the quiet evening streets of Babylon, now wrapped in purples and soft grays. The sun has officially checked out for the day, but its legacy lingers, etched in the fading warmth of the bricks, the soft glow of the horizon, and most of all, the echo of its final shadow. And in this dusk-tinted world, the rhythm of the city doesn't stop, it just changes. Because here, even time is sacred, not just practical, but personal, spiritual, and surprisingly theatrical. You pass through a narrow alleyway lined with clay lamps just starting to flicker to life. Somewhere ahead, a chant rises from a temple annex, slow, rhythmic, like a lullaby written for the gods. And just beyond that, a strange smell wafts your way. Not food, not fire, incense. Thick and smoky. You follow it, and soon you find yourself in another open courtyard, this one smaller, surrounded by low walls etched with symbols and lined with benches. The people here aren't selling anything. They're waiting. You take a seat on a cool stone bench. The stars above are blinking awake. A priest emerges with a long staff, not a weapon, but a ceremonial pointer, and begins tracing arcs in the sand. He isn't explaining anything out loud. He's just marking, mapping, measuring. From the way others lean forward, this is familiar to them. It's time for the nightly transition, the shift from solar shadows to lunar omens. In Babylon, time didn't end at sunset. The moon took over the watch, and just as daylight was marked by shadows, night had its own language. Stars, phases, glow strength, position above the horizon. For the Babylonians, the heavens were a 24-hour job. Mainstream historians agree that Babylonian priests tracked both solar and lunar cycles meticulously, integrating them into calendars, rituals, and even farming schedules. But while the sun gave you hours, the moon spoke in moods, gentle, mysterious, and sometimes alarming. Tonight is a waxing crescent, low in the sky. The priest nods with approval, no omen, just a good sign for planting dates and possibly marrying someone without consulting your uncle first. Around you, people visibly relax. A waning moon or an eclipse would have meant postponing travel, sacrifices, or even punishments. You grin. Imagine canceling a court case because the moon looked slightly annoyed. One quirky theory from fringe scholars suggests that some priests believed shadows themselves could absorb bad omens. Think of it like cosmic laundry. The darker the shadow, the more it soaked up celestial tension. This idea never made it into mainstream practice or Babylonian sitcoms, but it's a fun mental image. Shadow therapy for grumpy gods. Your attention shifts to a large stone slab resting at an angle in the corner of the courtyard. A shadow, barely visible under the starlight, is cast along its surface. And again, you marvel. Even with no sunlight, the Babylonians found a way to measure movement, mark time, and monitor divine mood. Back in the city's core, not far from the temples, scribes are already at work. They're copying the evening's observations onto clay tablets. Part of the legendary Babylonian star diaries. These weren't bedtime stories. They were scientific logs, kept for centuries, tracking everything from eclipses to storms to the occasional comet freakout. You peer over one young scribe's shoulder. His stylus dances over the clay, making neat, wedge-shaped impressions. Tonight's entry includes the moon's position, a record of temple shadows, and a weather note. Winds from the northeast, cooling. Simple, precise. Centuries ahead of its time. But even these records weren't just facts. Each observation carried weight. Because in Babylon, time wasn't neutral, it was a performance, and the gods were the critics. If your timing was off, if a ritual was performed before the right shadow appeared, you didn't just annoy your coworkers, you potentially doomed the whole harvest. Or worse, caused a political scandal. You chuckle at that. Imagine blaming a diplomatic crisis on the wrong angle of light. Still, it wasn't always so serious. Sometimes, these shadow rituals doubled as public theater. Picture this. A crowd gathers, murmuring, watching the temple's long shadow inch toward a particular doorway. Once it touches the threshold, the high priest steps out dramatically, announces a new month, and tosses flowers. Or, unleashes a goat. Babylon had range. Historians still argue whether some of these rituals were coordinated with clock-like accuracy or simply symbolic approximations. After all, not everyone had access to the correct shadow. But as with all great systems, the belief in it was often more important than the precision. The crowd in the courtyard begins to disperse. Some leave quietly. Others stop to glance at the stars. The city is winding down, but you can sense that the timekeeping never truly stops. The earth is still turning, the stars still shifting. It's just that now, someone else is on the night shift. You walk back slowly, past the outer wall of a small shrine. There, barely visible by the flickering lamplight, is an ancient carving. A man holding a rod beside a crescent moon. A shadow is drawn beside him, etched into the stone like a permanent reminder. Time has form. Time has direction. Time can be read, even in darkness. And you think, in a world without clocks, perhaps the most powerful thing you can do is pay attention. To the sky, to the ground, to the slow lean of shadow across your path. Time isn't something you wear, it's something you notice. You lie back on a low rooftop, arms folded behind your head. The stars above are clear, sharp, busy. You realize that to the Babylonians, those stars weren't just pretty dots. They were letters from the divine, blinking messages across eternity. And the shadows down here? Just footnotes. But what glorious footnotes they were. By now, the stars are fully out, glinting across the night sky like tiny holes poked in a vast curtain. You hear an owl call from somewhere behind a rooftop, and the soft rustle of wind through the date palms lining the city's perimeter. Babylon at night is hushed but alive, and as you make your way down from the rooftops, a strange thought follows you. How much of your life is controlled by time, and how much of time is just you agreeing to let it? Tonight, we find ourselves back in the heart of the city, not in a temple, not in a courtyard, but in the market square, where merchants and farmers once packed up their goods and prepared for the journey home. This is where Babylon's timekeeping took on a more grounded, gritty tone. Because for the average person, there were no fancy tablets or ceremonial sun bowls. There was shadow and there was sand. Imagine this. A tired vendor squats beside a worn wooden crate. He reaches into a sack and pulls out a curved bowl, roughly carved, patched with resin. He fills it slowly with fine river sand, then sets it on the ground next to him. A small hole at the bottom begins to let grains fall into another bowl beneath it. No shadows, no stars, just gravity and patience. You're looking at a clepsydra, also known as a water clock, but this one is the dry kind. Because hey, not everyone had spare water lying around. Yes, Babylon had clepsydras, vessels that used water or sand to track time by the slow, steady flow of material from one container to another. These were especially useful indoors or on cloudy days, when the sun decided to take a personal day off. Historians widely acknowledge their use in both temple ritual and daily life, though the design varied wildly from place to place. But here's the delicious irony. Babylonian clepsydras were rarely used to tell exact time. They weren't precise enough. What they did provide was duration, a way to track how long something lasted. Cooking, praying, public speaking. Imagine if your boss's meetings were limited by a bowl of dripping water. Even legal disputes had time limits enforced by clepsydras. Courtrooms with clocks? Not yet. But courtroom bowls? Absolutely. And here's a fun fringe theory. Some scholars speculate that the very sound of water dripping from clepsydras was thought to have calming or sacred properties, used to soothe temple visitors during long waits or meditation. Whether true or not, you can't deny the effect. It's late, you're tired, and the imagined plink, plink, plink of that ancient device is somehow more relaxing than any white noise app you've tried. You kneel beside the clepsydra and watch the sand slowly sift through the hole. It's hypnotic. In a way, it's more honest than your phone. No numbers, no math, just movement. Unrushed, undeniable. Even if you're bad at math, you know when the top bowl is empty, something's finished. Nearby, a group of young boys plays a shadow game, using a small lamp to cast silhouettes of animals on the courtyard wall. A camel, a fish, a man with floppy arms. They giggle and squawk, but their laughter fades when a teacher figure claps twice and brings out another tool, a curved stick with markings burned into it. He plants it in the ground and lights a lamp beside it. This isn't a sundial. It's something humbler and even older, a nocturnal shadow stick, made for gauging how much moonlight remains before dawn. It works, more or less, by observing how the artificial light overlaps with moonlight and shadow across the stick's etched surface. Primitive? Sure, but for someone walking home through the marshes, knowing whether it's 3 hours to sunrise or just 30 minutes, could be the difference between a safe journey and a snakebite. It all ties together. Timekeeping wasn't just about telling time, it was about telling stories, about managing uncertainty, about survival. No part of the system existed in isolation. Sand, shadow, water, stars. They all blended together into a single philosophy of rhythm. But with all this effort to measure and manage time, you might be wondering, did people in Babylon ever disagree about the time? Oh yes, absolutely. And that's where things get human. Historians still argue whether Babylonian priests manipulated shadow readings to suit their agendas. Think about it. If a temple festival wasn't going as planned, all a clever priest had to do was say, "The shadow hasn't touched the third stone yet. We must continue." Was it spiritually necessary? Or was he just enjoying the feast's free honey cakes? We may never know, but it's comforting to realize that even in the shadow-obsessed world of ancient Mesopotamia, people still stretched time when it suited them. Back in the courtyard, a merchant packs up his goods by lamp glow. He glances at the clepsydra, now almost empty, and sighs. He isn't annoyed. He isn't panicked. He simply knows. The time has come. His day is done. The bowl has spoken. You sit beside that clepsydra, watching the last few grains trickle down. A soft wind brushes past, tugging gently at your sleeve like a reminder. It's time to move again. Not rushed, not late, just ready. As you stand, a small clay plaque catches your eye. It's embedded in the wall, half covered in moss. You wipe it gently. The inscription reads something like, "To measure the heavens is to know the will of the gods, but to watch a shadow is to know your place beneath them." It's a lot to think about. But maybe, just maybe, that place beneath the gods, beneath the moving shadows and silent sand, isn't so bad after all. The wind tonight has a cooler edge. It brushes past the palms with a faint rustle, lifting the scent of tamarisk and distant cooking fires. You pull your robe, or maybe it's just your imagination, tighter around your shoulders. Babylon is easing deeper into the night, but time, That ever-watchful companion keeps whispering forward. Tonight's destination lies on the outskirts, past the city walls, past the bustle, out where the land begins to lose its shape. Less city, more open field, more sky than stone. You follow a dusty path lined with torches, flickering like fireflies, trying their best. Ahead, a structure rises from the earth, like something half-buried and half-built. A wide, flat platform carved from stone and brick, its corners aligned so precisely they make your modern city planners look like finger-painting children. You've reached one of Babylon's astronomical platforms, a raised observation deck built by priest astronomers for the sole purpose of watching the stars and the shifting sky. Some call them ziggurat terraces. Others believe they were part of observational towers, separate from temples. Either way, they were dedicated to reading the heavens, and yes, to measuring shadows, even under the starlight. You climb slowly. No railing, no neon signs, just wide, steady steps that force you to be intentional with every movement. As you reach the top, a sense of hush settles over you like a soft cloth. There are no crowds here, just two figures seated beside a stone platform, their robes pale under the moonlight. One nods to you. The other is carefully moving a piece of twine across a set of carved grooves on the stone surface. Every few inches, he pauses and peers upward, squinting at the angle of the moon. You sit quietly nearby, letting the view swallow you whole. Babylon sprawls behind you, glowing faintly with torches and oil lamps. Ahead is open country, and above you, the entire sky. This is where time was not just measured, but interpreted. Because here, shadows didn't only come from the sun. They came from starlight, moonlight, and even reflected light from clouds. The Babylonians were obsessed with tracking the night as carefully as the day. One mainstream fact: Babylonian astronomers developed accurate predictions of lunar eclipses long before anyone else. They didn't just observe, they calculated. With no telescopes, no calculators, just patterns, shadows, and time. You glance at the grooves in the stone. They're subtle, almost invisible unless you know what to look for, like faint fingerprints left by the cosmos. One track marks the moon's transit across the sky, another the rising of Venus, known to them as the brilliant Ishtar star. When the moon casts its pale glow across the stone, those grooves light up just enough for the priests to read them. Historians still argue whether these platforms functioned more like star charts or ritual altars. But standing here, you sense it was both. A science lab in one moment, a prayer bench in the next. No contradiction, just layers of meaning. A fringe but fascinating theory suggests that some of these nighttime measurements included tracking the movement of temple shadows under full moonlight, a kind of ghost sundial working off reflected lunar rays. Whether or not it worked reliably, that's another debate. But it shows you how deeply woven shadow and time were into their minds. Even when the sun slept, the concept of measurement stayed awake. A priest beside you whispers something you don't understand. He's reading from a clay tablet. It's an omen series, one of many written and recited during night observations. Each line correlates a celestial event. If Venus rises before the moon on the third night, a foreign king will die. Or if the full moon hides for 2 nights, famine approaches. You'd laugh, but then again, your modern life still spins on predictions too. Stock markets, weather apps, horoscope memes, different tools, same hunger for knowing what comes next. As the night deepens, a quiet bell sounds. A small bowl of oil is lit. The flame flickers in the breeze, casting its own tiny shadow across the platform. And here, again, time makes an entrance. Even this modest flame has meaning. The length of its shadow at moonrise is recorded, compared, logged. It may indicate a delay in planting, or a favorable time to dig irrigation channels. You let your eyes drift. Time no longer feels sharp. It's melted into the stars, the sand, the wind. You think of how your modern clocks shout the hours, demand obedience. But here, time isn't a command. It's an invitation. And somehow, despite the utter lack of digits or ticking, you feel completely oriented. You know where you are in the day, in the month, even in the year. The sky has told you. A shooting star arcs overhead. The priests glance up, note it, and scratch something quickly into clay. A small omen, perhaps. You wonder what it will mean. But then again, maybe it just means you were lucky enough to see it. A final observation before the night shift ends. You notice a small clay cone embedded into the platform's edge. It seems purely decorative, until a shadow falls neatly across it and aligns with a notch on the stone ledge. A priest sees it too, nods, and quietly announces something. Time to return. Another moment measured. Another line added to the ledger of the stars. You stand, stretch, and glance one last time at the wide-open sky. It's not a clock face. It's not an interface. But it is telling you everything you need to know. You descend quietly, feeling the world beneath your feet turn, ever so slightly, carrying you with it, through shadows, through silence, through time. By the time you make it back inside the city walls, the night has deepened into a velvet blue. Babylon sleeps with one eye open. The stars are still watching, and so are the timekeepers. But now, you find yourself drawn somewhere different, less formal, less sacred. A quiet neighborhood tucked beside the city's edge. Mud brick homes, low doorways, woven mats. Not priests, not scribes, just families, merchants, farmers, children. Because if you really want to understand how the Babylonians measured time, you can't just look at temples and towers. You have to step into the home, into the places where life actually happened, where people cooked, ate, argued, sang lullabies, and watched the light move across their kitchen walls. You slip into one of these courtyards, unnoticed. There's a cooking fire smoldering in the corner, and an old man sitting with his back to the wall, his feet propped up, his eyes half-lidded. Not asleep, just comfortable. Watching. He's watching a shadow, of course he is, cast by a beam overhead onto the far wall. You follow his gaze and see a row of tiny etched marks, maybe 9 or 10 of them, cut into the mud brick itself. They aren't numbers. They're not even symbols. They're just shallow grooves, one slightly longer than the next. You found a domestic time scale, not a sundial, not a priestly tool, but something far more human. A way to know when to knead the dough, when to call the children in from play, when the wife would be home from the weaving circle. Mainstream historians recognize that many Babylonian homes incorporated passive solar observation, tracking where sunlight fell on certain bricks or doorways at different times of day. In other words, your living room was your clock, and if you lived there long enough, you didn't need etched lines. You just knew. The way the light looked at nearly supper, or how the shadows stretched long and skinny during the storytelling hour. And honestly, isn't that kind of wonderful? You never checked the time. You just noticed it. You move around the courtyard, finding other examples. A cracked water jug with an oddly shaved handle. It casts a line on the ground at exactly the hour the goats needed to be brought back from pasture. A lump of clay hardened into a shape that fits perfectly into a sunbeam at the hottest hour. Likely a child's toy, maybe a nap alarm. The clock of experience. And then, in one corner, something a little different. A low bench with 4 indentations carved into the brick beside it. The kind of thing that doesn't look like much until the moonlight hits it just right. The indentations are small, but a shadow from the nearby column falls neatly across the 3rd notch. You glance at the old man again. He nods, as if to say, yes, it's time. Time for what? A prayer? A cup of milk? A quiet moment with a sleeping dog? One fringe theory posits that some households pass down shadow rituals as family traditions, Unique timing events that only applied to that family's wall, that family's courtyard. Imagine that. A sacred moment inherited like grandma's cookie recipe, triggered not by a date on a calendar, but by the shadow finally touching the last notch on the oven stone. And it's not all peace and poetry. This system had its limits. Historians still debate how Babylonian commoners handled time disputes. If two neighbors disagreed on when sunset prayers should begin, who was right? The one with a better wall? The one with a taller gnomon? Or maybe whoever had more convincing shadow witnesses? You chuckle at the image of a neighborhood court case involving three uncles arguing about the angle of a roof beam. Still, most people didn't need to argue, because this kind of time wasn't about being exact. It was about belonging. You knew your place in the day because your house told you. Your yard told you. Even your cat probably knew. A quiet breeze flows through the courtyard. The coals in the cooking pit shift and crackle. The old man stands slowly, stretches, and pours a bit of water over the fire. A soft hiss, then stillness. He pauses to glance at the wall one last time before disappearing into the house. The third notch, no doubt, meant it was finally bedtime. You linger a moment longer, tracing your fingers along the notches, each one a little uneven, worn, honest. Because this was time at its most human, imperfect, practical, intimate. Not for temples, not for kings, just for people. For moments that mattered, not because a priest declared them sacred, but because your mother sang during them. Because your father came home from the fields when the light hit just that brick. Because your life didn't run on seconds, it ran on sunlight. As you step out of the courtyard, you take one last glance back. The moonlight is shifting, and the shadows have moved. The fourth notch is now partially touched, and just like that, you're in tomorrow. Morning returns slowly, not with trumpets or fanfare, but with the soft blue glow that nudges the world awake, one brick at a time. You feel it before you see it, the warmth inching across your face, the birds beginning their repetitive arguments in the trees, the distant shuffle of feet in temple corridors. You step out into the street again, and the city has returned to life. The shadows are shorter now, stiff and sharp, like they just got out of bed. And in Babylon, that means it's time for business. But this morning, we're heading not to a temple or a market, but somewhere you probably weren't expecting. A classroom. Or rather, the ancient version of one. Tucked between residential homes and a small shrine lies a courtyard shaded by a fig tree. Low benches line the sides, and a group of boys, hair tousled, elbows flying, scrambles to sit before an older man who seems deeply unimpressed with all of them. You've stumbled into a scribal school, one of the famed Edaba or tablet houses, where young Babylonian students were trained not just in writing, but in mathematics, accounting, and yes, timekeeping. Because if you wanted to succeed in Babylon, especially in administration or temple life, you needed to know how time worked. Not just that it existed, but how to calculate it, predict it, and document it. One boy begins reciting a list of star names. Another is carving shallow triangles into a clay tablet, part of a basic shadow calculation exercise. You watch as the teacher draws a line in the dirt and plants a short stick in the center. The sunlight casts a stubby shadow to the left. "What time is it?" he asks in a tone that suggests no answer will be good enough. This is how it starts. By learning to read gnomons, the students begin their journey into Babylon's complex relationship with time. Mainstream evidence shows that Babylonian scribal schools included training in basic shadow measurement and calendar interpretation. These weren't electives, they were essentials. You didn't just write what the priest said, you had to understand what the shadow meant. One student is solving a word problem etched in cuneiform. The gnomon is 3 fingers tall, and the shadow is 9 fingers long. What is the sun's height above the horizon? You grin. Not much different than your old trigonometry nightmares, just with more clay. And here's a quirky twist. Some preserved tablets show that students were graded not just on their math, but on their shadow reading accuracy. In other words, the sun could literally flunk you. It's not clear if they got detention or just a passive-aggressive goat noise from the instructor, but the pressure was real. Beyond the numbers, the students are also learning the rhythm of time itself. When days grow longer, when certain stars rise before dawn, when shadows start curving differently near solstice. These aren't just facts. They're tools for managing everything from harvests to temple choreography. You watch as the teacher unrolls a reference tablet, a thick slab etched with months, moon phases, and the standard time markers for key religious observances. Each entry isn't just a date. It includes shadow lengths, gnomon angles, and even cloud coverage expectations. Historians still argue whether these teaching tablets were universal templates or tailored for specific regions. After all, Babylon was huge, and shadow length at noon could differ significantly depending on your latitude. Either way, this wasn't just a classroom. It was a factory of future timekeepers. You lean closer to a younger student who's clearly struggling. His tablet is a mess, numbers scratched over numbers, lines wobbling like a drunken beetle. The teacher scowls and corrects his calculation by reshaping a simple triangle in the dirt. You recognize it, the first shadow geometry. Basic trig before trig existed. No protractor, just light and instinct. And yet it worked. Babylonian scribes knew how to estimate time based on shadow ratios, long before Pythagoras ever made it fashionable. To them, it wasn't about formulas. It was about rhythm, shape, relationship. You begin to see how this all fits together. The temples and ziggurats, they gave divine structure. The home, familiar rhythm. But the scribes, they made it official, measured, recorded. Time had to be taught, passed down, shaped like clay. And just like that, the class ends, not with a bell, but with a shift in the sun. The gnomon's shadow has moved beyond a particular line in the dirt, and the teacher raises a hand. Dismissal. No one argues. The kids scatter like dust on the wind. But one lingers. A boy, maybe 10 or 11, still staring at the stick and its stretching shadow. You recognize the look. Curiosity, frustration, awe. Maybe this one will become a temple astronomer someday. Or maybe he'll just be the best shadow reader in his neighborhood. Either way, the work begins here. You step away from the school slowly, back into the busy street. The shadows are growing longer again, slipping into that early afternoon stretch. A vendor wipes sweat from his forehead and squints at the edge of his stall. He's watching for the moment when the light finally touches the cracked corner brick. That's when he'll start packing up. No one told him that rule. He just knows. It's in his bones. His own kind of graduation. And so the cycle continues. Time is taught. Time is inherited. Time is lived. The day continues, its heat now fully matured. Sunlight settles like syrup on the stone, slow and thick, making everything feel just a little too bright. You drift away from the scribal school, ducking into the occasional shade patch, like a clever desert animal. The city hums with quiet motion, the clink of tools, the murmur of trade, the shouts of someone bargaining a little too aggressively over a basket of onions. But your destination today is once again a place few tourists or time travelers would ever think to visit. Not a temple, not a marketplace, but the Bureau of Taxation. Yes, that's right. Even 4,000 years ago, taxes were inescapable, and someone had to track them. And of course, tracking taxes meant tracking time. You arrive at a long rectangular building with open-air corridors and tall shaded rooms. A clerk waves you in absent-mindedly, already buried in a stack of clay tablets. His desk is little more than a wooden plank laid across two crates, but his posture screams, "I run this place." Behind him, a large board leans against the wall, etched with rows and rows of names, grain counts, and time intervals. You squint. It's not a calendar, exactly. It's a tribute ledger, and one of its most important columns is duration, when the tax was due, when it was paid, when it was late. And what was the main tool for keeping all this in order? A shadow. Naturally, a long wooden rod is hammered into the courtyard floor at a carefully calculated spot. Around it, small rocks are embedded in a circle, each one aligned with a time marker. As the shadow shifts, the rod touches different rocks. These aren't precise hours the way you know them. They're more like administrative intervals. By the third stone, a certain scribe should have finished morning entries. By the sixth, the inspectors return. By the ninth, the food rations for visiting officials must be distributed. It's sun-powered office scheduling, and honestly, it's kind of genius. Mainstream historical accounts confirm that Babylonian bureaucracy relied heavily on time-tracking systems for tax collection, civic duties, and agricultural records. These weren't optional tasks. They were the skeletal system of society, and the shadows were the spine. You notice a junior clerk muttering as he scratches into a tablet. He's copying a record of a farmer who missed his delivery of barley by 2 shadows past the 4th. The punishment? A fine, but not a brutal one. Just enough to make a point. Time was a legal standard. Miss it and the consequences weren't abstract. They were baked, etched, and stored. There's something slightly comic in watching these dusty old clerks relying on the same tools that priests used for interpreting divine omens. It's like watching an accountant consult the stars before issuing a parking ticket. And yet, one quirky historical tidbit suggests that tax records sometimes did include astrological notations, especially if a delay or mistake was believed to be caused by an unlucky day. So yes, sometimes a farmer got away with late barley if Mercury was in retrograde. Babylon was nothing if not spiritually flexible. You step outside into the central courtyard and see a man standing quietly beside the shadow rod. He's not a clerk. He's a messenger, waiting for the shadow to reach the 6th stone before he can deliver a document, because that's when the receiving scribe comes back from his midday meal. There are no clocks here, no timers, just knowledge, ritual, expectation. And here's the wild thing. Historians still argue whether these interval stones were standard across regions or customized per office. Some claim they represent the earliest punch card system, marking employee hours in sunlit increments. Others think they were more fluid, more ceremonial. You could ask the clerk here, but he's too busy squinting at a cuneiform error in a barley report from 3 years ago. You lean against a pillar, watching how people seem to orbit the shadow rod without ever touching it. There's a reverence to it, not religious, exactly, just a shared understanding. This rod tells the truth. No exaggeration, no bribery. If the shadow says you're late, you're late. Another tablet catches your eye. It's cracked down the middle, but still legible. A scribble at the bottom reads, "Compensation owed for delay. Shadow misread due to fog." You smile. Even the best systems had their weather problems. There's an odd comfort in all of it. Time isn't just tracked, it's argued about. Just like today. I was only 5 minutes late. My sundial said it was still 4th interval. Babylon would have been very familiar with these conversations. As you prepare to leave, a final record is being logged by the head clerk, a citizen petitioning to have his tax date adjusted due to overcast festival skies throwing off his planting season. The clerk nods, sighs, and presses a final wedge of cuneiform into the wet clay. The moment is preserved. Time, once again, leaves its mark. You walk away with the feeling that this entire building is a sundial in disguise, from the layout of the rooms, to the placement of the rods, to the intervals of activity. Everything is synced to the sun, even the arguments. And maybe that's the point. Babylon didn't just measure time to understand the cosmos. They measured it to understand each other, to run a city, to decide what's fair, to file a complaint, to make a plan, to live. You leave the world of taxes behind with a surprising sense of peace. Who would have thought Babylonian bureaucracy could feel calming? But the rhythm of it The shadow-led rituals of work and pause had a sort of quiet logic, a pace you could trust. Unlike your modern schedule, where meetings pop up like weeds and email never sleeps, the Babylonians followed a rhythm that came straight from the sky. Now, your feet take you toward higher ground, past the clusters of homes, beyond the tax courts and scribal benches, toward the place where heaven met earth, the ziggurat. Not just any ziggurat. This is the Adamananki, the towering house of the foundation of heaven and earth. Its base stretches wider than a football field, and its upper levels vanish almost into the haze of sunlight above. But you're not here for the views. You're here for the ultimate timekeeper of Babylon. You climb slowly, step by deliberate step, each one slightly worn by centuries of priests, pilgrims, astronomers, and the occasional goat. As you ascend, the wind picks up, so does the silence. Up here, even the noise of the city fades into something softer. At the third level, a large open platform greets you, flat, sun-drenched, and empty save for a single feature. A monumental shadow pillar, easily 2 meters tall, mounted in the stone like an ancient antenna. You've reached Babylon's great gnomon. It doesn't look like much, just a dark, weather-smoothed post rising from a base of engraved stone. But this right here was one of the primary ways Babylon measured seasons. Not hours, not minutes, but the deeper pulse of time, the slow tilt of the earth, revealed through the lengthening and shortening of this shadow over weeks and months. Mainstream historians agree that ancient Mesopotamians tracked seasonal change using shadow measurements from tall gnomons on elevated platforms. The idea was simple. The lower the sun in the sky, the longer the shadow. Track that shadow's position and length at the same time each day, and you begin to notice a pattern. A cosmic heartbeat. You sit in the gnomon's shadow. It stretches to your left, longer than midday, shorter than solstice. Somewhere in between. It tells you that you're in a turning season, maybe late spring, maybe early autumn. Time folds like that when you're listening this closely. A young priest in a white robe walks past and glances at a stone tile embedded in the platform. You follow his gaze and notice faint markings, series of lines fanning outward, radiating like spokes on a wheel. Each one matches a specific solar position. When the gnomon's shadow aligns with the farthest edge, that's winter solstice. The shortest edge, summer. But here's where it gets interesting. One lesser-known theory suggests these shadow wheels weren't just practical, they were theatrical. Some scholars believe ziggurat ceremonies were timed to begin exactly when the gnomon's shadow hit a certain line. Imagine a sea of robes, musicians, and chanting priests, all waiting for a shadow to trigger the first drumbeat. No stage manager needed, just the sun. You smile. It's like a cosmic stage cue. Now entering, the god of spring. You walk to the edge of the platform and look down. Far below, the city hums. You can see the river, the markets, the courtyards, even the shadow of the ziggurat stretching across them all, like a giant hand gently touching its people. That's when it hits you. This was the biggest sundial in the city. The ziggurat itself. Not just the pillar, but the building, the steps, the very shadow it cast across the earth. From this height, time didn't just pass. It reached outward, touched the streets, marked the homes. Even people who couldn't read or write could see the ziggurat's shadow on their doorstep and know it's almost time for planting or prayer or rest. Historians still argue whether the Adamananki's architecture was intentionally aligned for precise solar tracking, or whether it was simply a happy cosmic accident. But even if the architects didn't have slide rules, they had intuition. They knew light, and they knew the world moved in rhythms too beautiful to ignore. You step around the gnomon one more time and find a small bowl resting in its base, filled with smooth stones. Black, white, red. The young priest returns, picks one up, and places it in a shallow indentation marked with a symbol. It's a simple gesture. Maybe it's a record. Maybe a prayer. Maybe just habit. A fringe but fascinating idea posits that these stones were used to create shadow maps, left in place to mark daily shadow positions over time. Imagine the ziggurat not just as a building, but as a giant analog calendar, reset daily by the rising sun. It's the kind of thing that makes your smartwatch feel suddenly insecure. The sun is climbing higher now. The shadow grows shorter. You watch it retreat across the wheel, touching a new line. Somewhere below, a priest sees the same and begins preparing for the afternoon chants. You don't need a clock to know. The day is halfway spent. The gnomon has spoken. As you descend from the ziggurat, the shadow behind you follows. Short, strong, steady. Just like the Babylonians hoped their timekeeping would be. Not a machine, not a number. A presence. And as you reach the base, your gaze lifts again toward that quiet tower of stone and shadow, and you realize this was Babylon's tallest storyteller. Every day, it told the same story, just in a slightly different voice. You walk away from the ziggurat slowly, half in sunlight, half in shade. The air smells of warm brick, blooming reeds, and the faintest trace of incense drifting on the breeze. Babylon stretches before you like a golden map, every rooftop a marker, every alley a thread. And woven through it all is the same silent pulse. The shadows shifting, inch by inch, like whispers from the gods. This time, your path takes you toward the water. The Euphrates River, wide and slow, slices the city into east and west. Its banks are lined with small docks, graying barges, and bathers splashing noisily in the shallows. You'd think, in all this chaos and drift, time might lose its edge. But you'd be wrong. Because here, on the riverbanks, the Babylonians practiced one of their most practical and poetic forms of timekeeping: tide and current observation. Yes, in a world of sundials and gnomons, there was another subtler clock. The way shadows danced on water. You settle near a small wharf, watching a pair of young boys toss pebbles into the current. An older man nearby kneels beside a post driven into the muddy bank. You notice small lines carved up its length, now half submerged. Every few minutes, he marks the water level with a reed dipped in clay slip. You've found a river timekeeper, not a priest, not a scribe, but a practical observer of Babylon's second great clock. Because the river didn't just bring fish and trade, it brought rhythm. Mainstream historians confirm that Babylonian agriculturalists used the Euphrates' rise and fall to mark planting seasons, flood warnings, and key calendar transitions. But here's the twist. They also watched how shadows behaved on water surfaces to estimate time during overcast days or in places with no reliable walls. Think of it, a quiet inlet, the sun rising behind you, and the reflection of a tree's branches beginning to stretch across the river. A fisherman could tell, when the shadow reached the opposite bank, it was nearly midday. When it touched the reed beds, time to go home. Historians still argue whether this liquid gnomon method was widely taught or more of a folk tradition. But however it started, it endured. It was intuitive, beautiful, a way of measuring time that flowed just like the river itself. One particularly poetic method involved tracking the glint line, a sliver of bright light that shimmered on water between two poles. When the sun was in just the right position, the line aligned perfectly. It only lasted a minute or two, but that's all they needed. Market open, nets in, lessons end. And if you think that sounds suspiciously like a movie cue, you're not alone. One fringe interpretation even suggests that certain temple songs were timed to begin at the exact moment when the glint line appeared on the water, a moment considered divinely precise. Music guided not by a conductor, but by a flicker of sunlight off rippling water. You squint at the post in the mud. Its topmost carvings are shaped differently, wider, more ceremonial. A boy jogs past and glances at it. Not for long, just enough to know it's getting close to the should start heading home mark. The post isn't a relic. It's a clock, read by glancing, not studying. The kind of time you feel, not calculate. Farther downstream, a woman tends to laundry. She glances at a long, curved stick, planted in the earth nearby. Its tip points downriver, casting a shadow that moves just slightly every few minutes. She watches it for a moment, then wrings out her last cloth and leaves. Shadow-synced chores. Time as a partner, not a tyrant. And here's something else. Babylonians didn't use hours the way we do. Their days were divided differently depending on the season. Longer daylight meant longer hours. Shorter days meant shorter ones. No standardization, no forced symmetry. Just an acceptance that time, like the river, ebbs and flows. You walk a bit farther and spot a small shrine built beside a stone jetty. In its center, a bowl of polished bronze, catching the sun like a mirror. But it's not just decoration. Its shape allows sunlight to hit one specific part of the stone wall behind it at only one moment each day. This wasn't for telling time in the way we think of it. It was for marking a sacred moment, when light met metal and shadow danced behind it. It's hard to explain how this feels. It's not efficient. It's not laser precise. But it's grounded, present, a kind of time you don't chase, but live inside. And maybe that's the best way to describe what Babylon understood. Time wasn't a master, a schedule, or a burden. It was a conversation between light and surface, movement and stillness, land and sky. You sit on a stone bench, watching the sunlight flicker on the rippling surface. A breeze kicks up. For a moment, everything shifts. The glint line disappears. The post's shadow moves. A child laughs. And somewhere, perhaps in a temple or courtyard, someone picks up a stylus and presses a small wedge into clay, noting this hour, this exact ephemeral now. You rise from the riverbank slowly, brushing a little sand from your knees, and begin walking inland again. The heat is easing now, just a little, and the golden light of late afternoon makes everything feel like it's been dusted in bronze powder. Babylon, with all its sprawling corners, seems softer at this hour, as though the city itself is stretching out after a long day. But there's still one place left to visit before sunset. You follow the path toward a neighborhood known not for temples or courts, but for craftsmen, potters, brickmakers, metalworkers, all the quiet geniuses whose calloused hands shaped the bones of the city. And yes, they too measured time. Not with ceremony, not with cosmic drama, but with kilns and drying racks. You duck beneath an arched doorway and into a shady courtyard where clay jugs are stacked like sunbathing turtles. The potter, shirt off, hair tied, skin tanned to the color of old leather, is squinting at the floor. Not his tools, not his molds, but the shadows. One of the most overlooked, yet essential, timekeeping practices in ancient Babylon was found right here, measuring drying times based on the length and quality of a shadow. Not a fancy gnomon, not an astronomer's chart, just an instinctive understanding of what the sunlight felt like, how fast a rim would crack, how long before the bottom of a vessel was ready to lift. Time told through clay and fire. Mainstream archaeology recognizes that Babylonian artisans used passive solar timing to manage complex production cycles, especially with temperature-sensitive crafts like ceramics. And why not? Sundials were for nobles. The working class used the same sun, just more humbly. The potter points to a large slab where shallow bowls are lined up in rows. By the time the shadow touches that third crack, he mutters, not to you, just aloud, "I'll flip them." You look where he's pointing. It's barely visible, that third crack, but he's dead serious. Because if he flips too early, the clay warps. Too late, and it starts to flake. One lesser-known fact: Babylonian potters sometimes used fire shadows at night, tiny oil flames that would cast shifting patterns onto a kiln wall to help estimate heating stages. Forget thermometers. Just read the way the flicker moves across the brick. Further back in the yard, you spot an apprentice spinning a wheel lazily with one foot, eyes half closed, clearly trying to look productive while doing as little as possible. Every now and then, he glances at a stick planted beside a water jar. You follow his gaze. Yep, it's a work timer. When the shadow touches the jar's handle, he's supposed to rinse his hands and prep the next batch. Of course, he'll probably push it by a few minutes, but that's the beauty of this system. Flexible precision. It's precise enough. The stick doesn't judge. The sun doesn't scold. It just continues. You walk over to the kiln, hot, massive, half buried in the earth, and feel the waves of heat rising. There's no dial here either, but a small patch of white stone has been placed just outside the kiln entrance. Its surface is chalky, almost reflective. When the sun hits it at a sharp angle, the reflection flares just so, lighting the kiln mouth in a way that signals full burn. That's when the potter stirs the coals. Historians still debate whether this stone reflection method was common or a fluke discovery. Some say it was just clever improvisation. Others believe it was a standardized technique taught from master to apprentice, like a family recipe. Either way, you're watching a clock made of light and fire, without numbers, without fuss. A quirky detail in one unearthed tablet describes a potter who allegedly carved tiny sun symbols into his favorite drawing table, not to decorate, but to show where certain shadows should land when it was time to glaze. Archaeologists still argue if it was superstition, science, or just a personal tick. Either way, it worked. As the day stretches into late afternoon, the shadows grow longer, softer, more theatrical. You watch as the third crack finally disappears under shade. The potter rises, wipes his hands, and starts flipping the bowls one by one. The apprentice finally gets up and begins carrying fresh clay to the wheel. Nothing is said. The time has simply arrived. You sit nearby, taking in the quiet discipline of it all. No bells, no alarms, just routines etched into habit, into sunlight, into stone. You think back to your own world, where everything beeps and buzzes and vibrates, where being on time means fighting your calendar instead of flowing with the light. But here, time isn't broken into shards. It's smooth, woven, felt, and maybe that's what makes it restful. Not that it's slower, but that it's anchored in sun, in craft, in instinct. The potter brings you a cup of water, nods toward the sky. Soon, he says. You look up. The light's turning honey-colored, not quite sunset, but close. He doesn't need a clock to know that either. Just his hands, his shadow, his kiln. The sun sinks lower still, and Babylon begins to shimmer with the kind of soft golden light you only get when the day is finally giving in to evening. The air has shifted from the dry sharpness of afternoon to the warm hush of approaching night. You leave the potter's yard behind with a quiet nod, slipping back into the narrow alleys between homes where lanterns begin to flicker like fireflies. Tonight, we're going into the oldest part of the city, not the grand ziggurats or bustling markets, but a quarter that feels more like memory than architecture. The streets twist tighter here, the buildings lean into each other, like gossips. It's quieter, slower, the kind of place where everyone knows the name of the shadow that hits their doorstep at dinner time. You duck beneath a lintel, barely tall enough to clear your shoulders, and step into a storyteller's courtyard. He's waiting for you, barefoot, white-bearded, seated cross-legged beside a fire bowl. Around him, a few children already lie sprawled across woven mats, their eyelids heavy, their minds wandering. This, right here, is Babylon's most ancient clock, the storytelling hour. No gnomon, no tablet, just the steady certainty that when the first star appears, it's time for tales. Mainstream historical records confirm that Babylonian oral traditions were often passed on during twilight, a period deeply associated with ritual, rest, and reflection. And while priests tracked moon phases, and scribes plotted planetary alignments. Everyday families knew it was time to gather when the courtyard shadows disappeared and the stars began to claim the sky. You sit cross-legged like the others, and the storyteller begins, not with a bang, but with a breath. A long inhale, a soft exhale, and then, long ago, when the shadows spoke and the gods still listened. His voice is like smoke. It curls around your ears. It drapes itself across the floor. And as he speaks, you notice something remarkable. He's not watching the children. He's watching the firelight, the way it flickers on the walls, the way it dances across the ground. Each time the light shifts noticeably, he changes his tone, slows his words, adjusts the rhythm. He's timing the story with shadows. Not sun shadows, fire shadows. This wasn't unusual. One quirky detail, found in Mesopotamian folklore tablets, suggests that storytellers were trained to match the arc of a tale to the life cycle of a flame. When the fire leapt, the story soared. When it sank low, the story softened. They weren't just narrators, they were human clocks. It wasn't just entertainment, it was ritual. An emotional sundial. As the storyteller continues, this one's about a lion who tried to outrun his own shadow. Spoiler, didn't go well. You realize the kids are following the light more than the plot. Their eyes drift to the walls, where the flame's glow pulses gently in time with the words. Some are already asleep, heads on arms, dreaming of lions or stars, or maybe just bread. And above you, the sky has joined the performance. A few bright dots appear between the crumbling rooftops. Venus, first. Then, Jupiter, bold as ever. You remember now, the Babylonians were among the first to track time by stars. They mapped their appearances, disappearances, crossings, risings. To them, the stars weren't just lights. They were milestones, messengers. When this one rises, sow the barley. When that one fades, cover the roof. When both hang together, tell the lion story. Historians still debate how precisely the Babylonians used star patterns to mark nightly time intervals. Some believe they divided night into watches based on specific star positions. Others think it was more fluid, more observational, just knowing what the sky should look like when the bread was done or when the guards changed shifts. Back in the courtyard, the fire dips low. The storyteller's voice falls to a hush. His final words slip out like a sigh. Or? And so the lion learned, too late, that no one outruns what they do not face. The kids are motionless. One soars softly. Another murmurs something about honey. The firelight flutters one last time, then steadies. The story is over. Not because a bell rang, not because a timer went off, but because the shadows said so. And then you notice it. The first true night shadow. Not cast by sun, or flame, or building, but by moonlight. Silvery and slow, barely perceptible as it slides across the courtyard floor. The moon has risen, and with it, Babylon's final, softest measure of time. A woman appears at the courtyard gate, scooping up a child. She whispers thanks to the old man. He nods, already stoking the coals with one hand, pouring tea with the other. This wasn't a performance. It was a schedule. A bedtime marked not in numbers, but in moments. And as you rise to leave, you look down at your own shadow, faint, cool. Not long now until it disappears entirely. In Babylon, the end of the day is not a cutoff, it's a fading. Like firelight on a child's cheek. Like the final beat of a story that doesn't need a pause, only silence. Night has settled over Babylon like a deep velvet cloth, soft, warm, and heavy with the scent of dust, smoke, and something faintly sweet, maybe honey cakes cooling on a rooftop sill. The stars are scattered across the sky now, their quiet authority undimmed by time or empire. And you are still walking. Slowly now. Each step muffled by the hush that only ancient cities can hold. But before this journey ends, there's one more place to visit. You find yourself near the Temple of Sin, the moon god. It isn't as grand as the ziggurat you climbed earlier, but it has its own presence. Low, rounded, and crowned with a dome that reflects just enough moonlight to make it look alive. It's quiet here. Even the wind feels reverent. Inside, a few oil lamps flicker against walls painted with silver pigments in faded sky blue. The priests are silent. They move like shadows themselves, soft-footed, hooded, carrying bowls of crushed herbs and tiny tablets of inscriptions. You're not here to pray, though. You're here to see the final calendar of Babylon, the one that exists not on Earth, but in the heavens. Because while sun and shadow ruled the day, the night belonged to the moon. You step into a chamber with a high slit in the ceiling, perfectly angled to let in moonlight during certain phases. And on the floor, a ring of inscribed stones, each one aligned with a specific point in the lunar cycle. Full, waning, new, waxing. You kneel. It's cool here, silent. Mainstream evidence shows that Babylonian priests tracked the moon with astonishing precision, marking 29.5 day cycles, predicting eclipses, and coordinating festivals based on lunar transitions. This wasn't superstition. It was science draped in sacred cloth. A priest gently places a polished silver disc onto the central stone. It catches the moonlight perfectly, reflecting it onto the ceiling. There's a soft gasp from somewhere behind you. Even now, it's mesmerizing. And here's something truly beautiful. The moon was not just a clock. It was a protector of dreams. The Babylonians believed that Sin, the moon god, guarded the boundary between waking and sleeping, between the visible and the veiled. So, in a way, all of Babylon's timekeeping ended here, where sleep begins. One fringe belief, preserved in rare tablets, claims that some priests could interpret dreams by tracking which lunar phase the dream occurred in, certain symbols meaning different things under a waning crescent than under a full moon. Historians debate whether this was a true divinatory system or just poetic flair. Either way, it shows how deeply entwined time and meaning were in this place. You recline against the cool stone, looking up at that sliver of silver moonlight on the ceiling, and you start to feel it. That slow, steady exhale of a day ending. The priests dim the lamps one by one. A flute begins to play, soft, single notes like feathers falling. The chamber smells of myrrh now. You could close your eyes. You could stay. And you understand now, fully, what the Babylonians knew. Time isn't measured in seconds. It's measured in feeling. In shadows on your doorstep, in reflections on a potter's kiln, in stories told just as the fire dies, in the moment before the moonlight fades from the top of a temple. You walk slowly through the darkened city, the streets nearly empty, the windows shuttered. Somewhere a dog barks once, then goes quiet. The only sound now is the wind nudging the reeds along the riverbank. You pause at the edge of the city, just before the gates, and turn back. Babylon doesn't look asleep. It looks timeless. You've seen its clocks, its calendars, its gnomons and rods and shining bulls. But none of those really held time. Not alone. Time in Babylon was something you shared, with the city, with the gods, with the stars and the shadows, and the strangers who read them beside you. And maybe, as you settle onto a quiet step, just outside the gate, you'll remember that. That sometimes the best way to tell time is to let it carry you. Like a river, like a shadow, like a whisper. And now, we let go. Let the images of ancient stone and whispering shadow drift like the last curls of incense into the quiet air around you. Let the weight of ziggurats and moonlight melt into the stillness behind your eyelids. There's no need to hold on to details now. Not the angles of a gnomon, or the lines carved into clay, or even the soft, flickering story told beneath firelight. They're all part of the same slow rhythm. the same breath, the same long, gentle exhale. In Babylon, time was a companion, not a cage. It didn't rush, it didn't chase. It flowed beside you like the Euphrates. It rose gently in sunlight and folded into the cool hush of evening. It was something you could trust, something you could feel in your skin and bones. And here, now, as your breath evens out and your limbs grow heavier, you carry that rhythm with you. A little more stillness, a little more softness. There are no clocks ticking now, just the echo of temple chants, the ripple of star reflections on quiet water, the slow sweep of moonlight across ancient stone. Nothing to do, nowhere to be, just this. Let the silence stretch. Let the shadows lengthen. Let yourself fall, gently and fully, into sleep. You've walked through time tonight, not as a visitor, but as part of its ancient flow. And in that flow, you are safe. You are timeless. You are home.